Welcome back. Since the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi assumed power more than a decade ago, he really decided to enhance and boost our relations with Africa to the maximum, and to have a strategic partnership with all African nations, and particularly those of the Nile Basin countries. We do share the same destiny, the same fate. And there are all the time summit talks, phone talks, consultations regarding a number of issues. And despite the fact that Egypt assumed the presidency of the African Union for 2 years, 2019 and 2020, Egypt is back to Africa more than that. And we are going to continue with that, and for the best interest of all African peoples. Among the latest consultations between the President and one of his African counterparts, it was very serious phone talks with his Ugandan counterpart, Yoweri Museveni, to shed more light on the talks and on the Egyptian-African relations in general. We are very much delighted to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Medhat Meligi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for being with us, sir, and a very good morning.
Very good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Sir, let's start with the history of the Egyptian-Ugandan relations.
Well, we are talking about a very long relation between the two countries, especially after His Excellency President Sisi took power after a long, let's say, African relations that were not actually up to the expectations of the historical Egyptian relations with many African countries, among which, of course, is Uganda. Yeah. And we can see that ever since President Sisi took power, he is trying to fortify the relations with African nations, specifically the Nile Basin countries, such as Uganda. We have very good cooperation on many international and regional issues, and we have actually a common point of view regarding many of those issues together. And that's why this call is one of a series of calls and consultations between Egyptians and Ugandan officials.
And to also discuss the challenges which are facing our black continent. Simply, as I said in my interview, we are sharing the same destiny, and as also, as you've kindly mentioned, particularly those Nile Basin countries. How do you see the way Egypt is really keen to address all the challenges facing the black continent and to resume consultations with the governments of these countries to make sure that it's going to be a process implemented on the ground to face the challenges, to solve the crises, and to meet any problem with the right solution?
Well, actually, I mean, beside the historical relations that is between Egypt and Uganda and the Egyptian and Ugandan peoples, there is a very important issue of enhancing the joint cooperation and how to explore broader horizons for bilateral relations in various fields, especially in the economical fields. I mean, it's not a secret that there are many regional issues that we coordinate with Uganda regarding this, whether we are talking about the Horn of Africa, which is a very important thing, and the water resources, which is a very pressing issue regarding especially Egypt. And I believe that with the continuous cooperation with moderate African countries, especially the Nile Basin country, is a very important issue to Egypt, especially after the high barrage, the high dam of Ethiopia that is affecting the Egyptian water resources and bringing us to a very dangerous point. And I believe that with the rest of the African countries, and especially the moderate ones like them, like Uganda, is a very important issue in order to...
In fact, we are keeping our all our relations, our foreign relations, in a very balanced manner. And when it comes to changes and challenges, our leadership knows well how to deal with them. But, sir, let me focus a little bit more on the economic and development side. Egypt is all the time giving examples or let's say showing readiness to help and to support and to give a hand to all African allies to continue with development, to start their development's road. And here I'm not going to mention examples because there are a lot of examples, last but not least the Julius Nyerere Dam in Tanzania, for example, where Egypt was really behind the establishment of it with Egyptian hands, of course in full cooperation between the Egyptian and Tanzanian counterparts. How do you see this will of Egypt, sir?
Well, actually, this is a very important topic since we are talking about there are some lies about Egypt trying to put obstacles in the way of African countries' development. And this is a pure example of, even in water resources, we are helping our friends in Tanzania to get what they need and to help them to develop further their countries, even though that this also is affecting the River Nile. But the problem has always been in coordinating and not in stopping any economical progress in African countries. And this actually is a very important issue. But letting this go, I mean, there are other examples. I mean, one of the issues that were touched upon during the call between President Sisi and President Museveni is about Uganda hosting the upcoming African Union Extraordinary Summit on Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Programs. This is also one of the reasons because, of course, Egypt is play always a key role in such summits and in such conferences and so on. And even the President Sisi, he stressed the need to draft African policies that support agriculture industries and enhance the empowerment of small farmers, and especially women and youth, by facilitating their access to financing and soft loans. I mean, the idea is that we have already plans, we have experience in those fields, and Egypt is an important country to implement those policies within not just Uganda, but within African countries and in African work, collective work within the African Union. So
this was my next point of discussion, sir, regarding the will of Egypt to share experience in various domains, and in particular when it comes to the developmental projects. Simply, we have here the reclamation of more than 1.5 million fathans. We are ready to exchange experience and expertise in this domain. And as you kindly mentioned, this was one of the points discussed in the phone call between President Sisi and his Ugandan counterpart. Taking you to another topic, for example, like the security issue, because one of the main issues Egypt really took care of while assuming the presidency of the African Union was silencing the gun. How do you see also this as another important point of discussion?
Exactly. One of the things, or one of the topics that were discussed during the phone call between the two leaders is combating terrorism.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of efforts Egypt is giving in this regard, not just Uganda, of course, but to many African countries. When I was ambassador in another African country, in Cameroon to be precise, I mean, we helped a lot with combating terrorism, as we know that we have there also the movement of Boko Haram and other Islamist movements, radical Islamist movement. And we also helped with combating terrorism. This is one fight that Egypt is not reluctant at all to uphold in order to help African countries in this domain. It's also worth mentioning that the Egyptian fund with African countries, which is one of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Department, is helping to build capacities in various fields. even in military and police work, of course, along with other issues, very important, very pertinent to the African countries. Not just that, we even accept to tailor some programs in order to help the African countries in what they need in a detailed way, that they only decide what they want. And this is why the Egyptian motto have always been to cooperate with the African countries based on win-win partnership. And this is a very important thing.
And since decades, our African officers are here in Egypt for training programs organized whether by the Egyptian Armed Forces or the Interior Ministry, and they are more than most welcomed all over the year. This is again showing the Egyptian readiness to share expertise and share experience in all domains. Also, sir, the Sudanese issue is really aching, and it's really a problem for all the Nile Basin countries, for Africa in general, for the region. How do you see this as one of the very important and, let's say, thorny topics which was discussed during the phone call between the two African presidents, President Sisi and President Museveni?
Well, we are both, I mean, especially Egypt is very concerned about what's happening in Sudan.
Yeah.
We want Sudan to regain its stability and its security again for the sake of the Sudanese people. We are not just sending messages of support, but actually we do support the Sudanese people, as we can all know and see with our own eyes the number of Sudanese refugees that we are hosting in Egypt until the situation gets back. So Egypt is not just involved when it comes to the Sudanese issue with just sweet words and best wishes for the Sudanese people to regain their country, but we are helping positively by hosting this number of Sudanese refugees to spare their life in the bloodshed that is going on there. This is on one side. Let's not forget, of course, the stability in the Horn of Africa, which is something very important for our strategic backyard, the Red Sea, which is a very important issue. And also President Sisi had discussed this issue with President Museveni. I mean, the idea of discussing, especially with the Ugandan counterpart, is a very important issue. Let's not forget that when Egypt was a little bit out of its scope in the African Union, President Museveni was one of the early presidents who spoke about that Egypt has to regain its seat in the African Union and has to become a full-fledged member again in the African Union as one of the founding countries that established this prestigious organization for the African countries. And the role of President Museveni and the relations ever since took us to higher levels and higher grounds because of their position politically, even in supporting Egypt at this hard times that we had after the revolution in 2013. So there is a lot of common point and historical issues that historical links, let's say, that are tying Egypt to Uganda, common faith, the River Nile, and of course the interest in many regional issues such as you mentioned, the Sudanese conflict and the Horn of Africa.
And yeah, the Somali issue, and as you mentioned, Egypt is giving a hand to Nigeria to face terrorism there, and of course to Somalia to face Al-Shabaab and to continue with development, because one of the most important ways of facing or of combating terrorism is development. True? If you agree with me on that, I mean.
Exactly, and not just terrorism, but also the illegal immigration towards Europe and other areas that actually is costing us lives of many African people who are seeing no hopes in their countries because of the economic situation. And this is also a very hot topic when it comes to the relations between the African countries and the European countries. There are so many things that Egypt is trying to help with. Egypt is sparing no effort when it comes to the African work, especially after assuming power of His Excellency President Sisi. He was the one, if we remember, one of the first visits he did was to the African continent, several countries.
Yeah.
His first tour was to Africa in order to show this. But here, let me stop and just whisper one word that I see very important in this equation, because President Sisi and the Egyptian government cannot do the work on their own. We need a very serious involvement of the private sector when it comes to ties and relations and economic exchange with the African countries.
You can bet on that, sir, because I think our businessmen are totally aware of their pivotal role, and there are all the time calls from the state, from the president, from the prime minister, to attract more investors, whether from Egypt or from outside Egypt. The private sector is going to have the lion's share in our economic process, and we hope that tomorrow, inshallah, is going to be a better day for Egypt,
One
for
last
the
thing,
Middle
if I
East,
may.
and for the whole world. Sir, as usual, I enjoyed our discussion. Thank you very much for your input, and have a very good day. We were very much delighted to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Medhat Meligi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Now let's dive back in history with our colleague Dina Yunus, ancient Egyptian civilization.